My grandmother pulled me aside at Thanksgiving 3 years ago and whispered, "I set something up for you. Don't worry about money forever." I smiled, hugged her, and assumed she meant she'd left me something in her will. I didn't ask questions. I was 26, working double shifts at the hospital, and honestly too exhausted to think past next Tuesday. I figured I'd find out eventually. I found out at Easter dinner, and not the way I expected. I want to tell you exactly what happened, because even now, sitting in my own apartment, my actual legal paid-for apartment, I still replay that Sunday afternoon and feel my stomach drop all over again. Not from fear this time, from sheer disbelief that any of it was real. My name is Maya. I'm a nurse. I work in a cardiac step-down unit, which means my patients are people who just survived something terrible and are one bad decision away from not surviving the next thing. I like that work. I'm good at it. I know how to stay calm when everything around me is falling apart. I want you to keep that detail in mind, because it matters later. For the 3 years between that Thanksgiving whisper and the Easter dinner, I was broke. Not struggling. A little broke. Genuinely, rationing my groceries, sleeping in my car for 6 weeks after my roommate moved out broke. I worked nights mostly. I picked up overtime whenever I could. I had a credit card I'd maxed out paying for my certification exams and a student loan that followed me around like a second shadow. I asked my uncle twice if I could borrow a small amount just to cover a security deposit on an apartment. Both times he said money was tight. Both times I believed him. My uncle Marcus had been my grandmother's financial manager for as long as I could remember. She'd appointed him when my grandfather died, back when I was 11. He was the responsible one, she always said. The one with the business degree and the connections and the calm voice that made everything sound like it was already handled. My mother was the creative one. My Aunt Diane was the social one. Marcus was the one you trusted with numbers. So she did. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, or what some of us pretended not to know, was that my grandmother had set up a formal trust fund for me the year I turned 18. Not a vague "I'll leave you something someday." A real, legal, documented trust. $47,000 to start, contributed by her and my grandfather over years of birthday checks and holiday deposits and quiet, careful saving. The trust was designed to release funds to me in 3 situations: to pay for education, to purchase a primary residence, or upon my 25th birthday, whichever came first. I turned 25 2 years before that Easter dinner. The money should have come to me automatically. Marcus was the trustee. I want to pause here and let that sit for a second. My grandmother told me not to worry about money forever. She had, in fact, arranged that very thing. She had done the paperwork and signed the documents and deposited the funds and believed, completely, that it was handled. She assumed I had received it. She assumed I was using it. She spent 3 years wondering why I seemed so tired all the time and why I never bought a place of my own and why I kept saying things like, "I just need to get stable first." She thought I was being cautious. She thought maybe I just liked renting. I thought she'd misspoken at Thanksgiving, that maybe she meant to say she'd left me something in her will and had jumbled the tense. We were both wrong about what the other one knew. The Easter dinner was at my Aunt Diane's house. Big table, too much food, my cousin Jess's new boyfriend looking overwhelmed in the corner. My grandmother sat at the head of the table, the way she always did, because no one would have dared suggest otherwise. She's 79. She still does her own taxes. She once returned a store-brand soup because it tasted nothing like the original, and she'd typed a formal letter to the company about it. She is not, and I want to be very precise here, a woman who lets things go. Midway through dinner, she looked at me from across the table and said, in the same tone she might use to ask about the weather, "Maya, have you been happy with how the trust has been managed? Have the disbursements been working for you?" I put down my fork. I said, "I'm sorry?" She tilted her head. "The trust. Marcus has been managing it since you turned 25. Have the payments been coming through all right?" I looked at Marcus. He was reaching for the breadbasket. His hand stopped midway. I said, "Grandma, I don't know what trust you're talking about." The table went quiet, not gradually. All at once, like someone had turned a dial. My grandmother set down her own fork. Very slowly. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at Marcus. And the thing about my grandmother, the thing I love most about her and feared most in that moment for Marcus's sake, is that her face does not perform emotions. She does not feel. She did not look confused. She did not look like she was searching for an explanation. She looked like a woman who had just confirmed something she had quietly suspected for longer than anyone realized. She said, "Marcus, explain." He said, "Mom, this isn't the time." She said, "I decide when the time is. I have 3 jobs. I have sat with patients at 2 in the morning while their hearts decided whether or not to keep going. I have delivered news that no one wants to hear. I have stayed steady through things that would make most people leave the room. But I am telling you, I have never felt a silence quite like the one that fell over that Easter table. My cousin Jess's boyfriend put down his fork too, slowly, like he understood instinctively that whatever was happening was not something he should make noise during. Marcus started talking. He said the trust had disbursement complications. He said there were administrative delays. He used the phrase fiduciary complexity, and I watched my grandmother's expression do something I had never seen it do before. It went completely, utterly still. She reached down beside her chair and lifted a manila folder onto the table. I hadn't noticed she'd brought it in. I hadn't noticed because she'd carried it in her large tote bag the same way she always carried her reading glasses and her crossword book and the small Bible she'd had since 1987. I hadn't noticed because she had not wanted me to notice. She had planned this dinner the same way she planned everything thoroughly, quietly, and completely. She opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Marcus. She said, I had a conversation with my attorney on Thursday, and then I had a conversation with a forensic accountant on Friday, and then I had another conversation with my attorney on Saturday. Today is Sunday, and I am having this conversation with you. Marcus looked at the paper. His jaw moved. He didn't say anything. I asked what was on the paper. My grandmother looked at me. She said, a summary of every withdrawal made from your trust over the past 2 years, categorized by date and destination. She said it the way she might read a grocery list. I asked her how much. She told me, I'm going to tell you the number because I think you deserve to hear it plainly, and I think I needed to say it out loud to someone other than my attorney. $61,000, the original $47,000, plus interest and a lump deposit my grandmother had added when I got my nursing license, because she was proud and she wanted to mark the occasion, and she had no idea, none, zero, not a single suspicion that the account was already being drained. $61,000, gone, not invested somewhere strange, not tied up in a legal technicality. Gone as in spent, as in my uncle's car lease, his daughter's private school tuition top-up, a vacation to Portugal, a deck renovation on a house I'd been invited to exactly once, a kitchen remodel, a birthday party. Line items so domestic and so specific that each one landed like a separate small punch. I said, Marcus, I slept in my car. He didn't look at me. I said it again. I slept in my car for 6 weeks because I couldn't afford a security deposit. I asked you twice for a loan. You said money was tight. He said, Maya, it's complicated. My grandmother said, it is not complicated. You stole from your niece. Say it plainly or don't speak. My Aunt Diane, who had said nothing for the past 10 minutes, stood up from the table and walked into the kitchen. I heard the faucet run. She was either getting water or she needed a moment alone, or both. I understood completely. Marcus tried a different direction. He said that he'd meant to pay it back, that he'd always intended for it to be a short-term arrangement. He said the word borrowed 6 times in 2 minutes. He said he was under pressure. He said the market had been bad. He said things had been harder than anyone knew. My grandmother let him finish. Every single word. She did not interrupt once. When he was done, she closed the folder. She said, I know what pressure is, Marcus. I raised 4 children on a teacher's salary after your father got sick. I saved money I couldn't afford to save for 20 years so that my grandchildren would have something. Pressure does not make someone steal. Pressure is an explanation. It is not an excuse, and it is not my granddaughter's problem to carry. I want to take a second here and ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where someone you love has been hurt, and you realize the hurt has been going on for a long time without you knowing, and you understand that your not knowing was also something the other person counted on? That's a particular kind of awful. My grandmother has never, in all the years I have known her, cried at a family dinner. She did not cry at this one, but her voice, when she said that last part, had something in it that I had never heard before. Something tight and deliberate, the way a voice sounds when it is holding itself together by force. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held mine. She did not look away from Marcus. She told him what came next. She told him clearly, which was the only way she told anyone anything. Her attorney had already filed a petition with the court to remove him as trustee. A demand letter had been sent to his home address on Saturday. The trust documents were already in the hands of a new trustee, a professional fiduciary her attorney had recommended. She had also contacted the state attorney general's office, because what he had done was not a family misunderstanding. It was breach of fiduciary duty. It was fraud. It was potentially theft by conversion. which her attorney had explained to her in language she had then repeated back to confirm she understood correctly, because she does not leave rooms uncertain. Marcus said, "Mom, you don't have to involve." She said, "I have already involved them." He said, "This will be public. This will embarrass the family." She said, "You embarrassed this family when you chose to steal from a 25-year-old who was sleeping in her car. I'm simply making sure it is documented." My cousin Jess across the table had been very still for a long time. She said softly, "Dad, did you actually do this?" He didn't answer her. That was its own kind of answer. What happened after that was not dramatic in the way you might imagine. There was no shouting, there was no throwing of things. Marcus left the table. He went to the living room and sat in a chair and called someone on his phone, his own attorney, I found out later. My Aunt Diane came back from the kitchen. She sat back down. She served herself more sweet potatoes. She did not look at her husband. She looked at me and she said, "I'm sorry, Maya." I believed her. And I also did not fully know what to do with that, so I just nodded. My grandmother served herself more ham. We finished Easter dinner. I do not know how else to explain it. We finished Easter dinner because my grandmother finished Easter dinner, and because the food was still there, and because some part of every person at that table understood that she had handled what needed handling, and we were now simply at dinner. Later, when the dishes were cleared, and my cousin's boyfriend had excused himself to the backyard with the look of a man who had witnessed something he would be thinking about for years, my grandmother took me into the sunroom off the back of my aunt's house. She sat in the wicker chair she always sat in when we came here. She folded her hands in her lap. She said, "I want to ask you something and I want you to answer honestly." I said, "Always." She said, "If I had not brought that folder today, how long would you have gone on not knowing?" I thought about it. I said, "Probably forever. I didn't know there was anything to know." She nodded, like that was exactly what she'd thought. She said, "I should have told you directly when I set it up. I thought I was protecting you. I thought letting Marcus handle it was protecting you. I made an assumption about who could be trusted, and I was wrong, and you paid for my being wrong." I said, "Grandma?" She said, "Let me finish. I'm telling you this because I need you to hear me say it. Not so you'll forgive me, but so you know that I understand what happened. The money is one thing. We will get the money. But you slept in your car and you didn't have to, and that is not something I will forget, and it is not something I will pretend isn't true just to make this easier to sit with." I didn't have a response to that. I just sat with her for a while. I want to tell you where things stand now, because I know you want to know, and because I think the ending of this story matters as much as the middle of it. Marcus did not fight the trustee removal. His own attorney apparently advised him not to. The formal complaint with the state attorney general moved forward. There are civil proceedings happening that I won't go into detail about, not because I'm protecting anyone, but because my own attorney has asked me to be careful about what I say publicly while things are ongoing. What I can tell you is that the legal process is moving. What I can tell you is that recovery of the funds is being pursued. What I can tell you is that my grandmother made sure I had what I needed immediately, not from the trust, from her own personal savings, because she said she had been setting money aside since the conversation with the accountant, and she had done so specifically in case this dinner went exactly the way it went. She had planned for the outcome. She had prepared for it. She had even saved money in case her own son denied everything, and the process took longer than expected. That is my grandmother. That is who she is. I have an apartment now. A real one with a lease in my name and furniture I picked out, and a kitchen where I have cooked actual meals at actual hours, instead of eating whatever the cafeteria had left at the end of my shift. I got a plant. I killed the plant, because I'm a cardiac nurse and not a botanist, but I got another plant and that one seems more resilient, which I appreciate. I still work nights sometimes. I still pick up overtime. Old habits take a while to loosen. But the difference between doing those things because you have to and doing them because you want to is one of the largest differences I have ever experienced. I did not know, until I was on the other side of it, how much of my energy had been spent just staying above water. I did not know how tired I was until I was allowed to stop. A few people have asked me if I'm angry. The honest answer is yes. And also, I don't have the bandwidth to be angry all the time. I spent 2 years sleeping in bad positions and eating vending machine food on night shifts, and telling myself that this was just the cost of building something, that everyone struggled like this, that one day it would ease up if I just kept going. And the whole time, there was money sitting in an account with my name on it, being spent on someone else's kitchen cabinets. Yes, I'm angry. I'm also 31 years old with my whole life in front of me and an apartment with enough room that when my grandmother visits, which she has now done twice, uninvited but welcome, carrying food and her crossword book, she can sit at my actual table and eat her actual food and look around and be satisfied with what she sees. At her second visit, She brought a second plant, a succulent. She said, "These are for people who care but are busy. I have kept it alive for 4 months. It sits on my windowsill, and sometimes when I come home from a long shift, I look at it and think about that Easter dinner in the folder, and the way my grandmother's voice stayed steady when everything in the room was not." She knew what she was doing. She always does. If there is one thing I want you to take from this, and I don't usually do the moral of the story thing because life is too complicated for single sentences, but if I had to say one thing, it's this. The people who love you correctly don't wait for you to figure out you've been wronged. They figure it out first, and they bring documentation. If you've ever felt like you were working harder than you should have to just to stay even, if you've ever taken someone's word for something that should have had paperwork, if you've ever been told don't worry, it's handled by someone who had every reason to want you not to ask questions. Please ask the questions. Be the person who asks the questions. My grandmother was 79 years old, reading forensic accounting summaries on a Friday afternoon because her granddaughter deserved better. The least I can do is ask questions.